Hello and welcome to another lesson, lesson 35 and writing exercise 17, how to properly write character dialogue. Character dialogue is the verbal conversation between two or more characters. While not always needed for stories, it can make it more engaging for readers. For writers, to write character dialogue properly, there are some key points to put into practice. The first key point is to use said as much as possible, which I mentioned in my other tutorial for limiting dialogue tags. You really want to use said as much as possible and not clutter the lines of dialogue with too long dialogue tags, as readers will pay more attention to the dialogue itself rather than the actual dialogue tags at the end of the sentences. The next one is don't use gestures or expressions as dialogue tags. This is one that some beginner writers do, is use gestures or expressions such as smiled, grinned, coughed, words like that at the end of dialogue, when really those are actually action beats. They're not dialogue tags. So you want to make sure that you use them properly and not as dialogue tags. The next is to apply action beats for balanced story pacing. This one can really be helpful, and it also helps to distinguish characters who's saying what when you use action beats, and allows you to build a type of setting where the characters are located rather than them just seeming like they're floating in space. So you want to add in some action beats just to give it more atmosphere and to distinguish your characters. The next key point is to use proper punctuation and sentence structure. For example, for pronouns, he or she, when you use those pronouns, you want to make sure that you only capitalize them if they're in the beginning of sentences, but if it's at the end of a sentence, then it should be lowercase. For example, he said, she said. You want to make sure that you punctuate those pronouns correctly at the beginning and at the end of dialogue. And the last key point is to limit the use of dialogue tags. Again, you want to make sure that you don't clutter your dialogue by using too long of dialogue tags such as demanded, responded. You don't want to use those types of words too often, and use said as much as possible. Alright, below here I have a passage from chapter 2 of my novel The Pack of Freedom. This is a conversation between my protagonist Millie and her best friend Pearl. I'm just going to read it before making the corrections down here, just so you'll be able to hear the difference between before and after the corrections. You look terrified, Pearl smiled. I am, I replied. It's my birthday, but I already feel like I'm getting itched. What if I say something foolish? You're good with words. Relax and just be yourself. There, you've all done. This dress brings out your deep blue eyes. Thanks, Pearl. As you can see, it sounds a little confusing, this passage up here, but I'm going to make the corrections down here based on what's inside of my novel so you can hear the difference. The first line here, you look terrified. We don't want to use smiled because that's a gesture, so we don't want to use that as a dialogue tag. I'm going to cross that out and actually type in the action beat that I have inside of my novel. Pearl wore a wry grin, pulling back the silk ribbon straps of my ruffled baby blue evening gown. There. And after this action beat is where I actually have the dialogue, so I'm going to type that in as well. You look terrified. And because we have it after this action beat inside the novel. The next line, I replied. It's my birthday, but I already feel like I'm getting hit. What if I say something foolish? All we have to do here is just remove replied and just put said in here, because we want to use said as much as possible. For the third line, we have, you're good with words, relax and just be yourself. Before that line, I actually have another action beat, which is from Pearl's perspective, so I'm going to type that in. Pearl chuckled and smiled. And we have another action beat after this dialogue, so I'm going to type that in as well. She tied the straps into a bow behind the small of my back. And after this action beat is the next line. There, you all done. This dress brings out your deep blue eyes. I'm going to type that in as well up here. So we can cross out this one underneath here. And then for the last line, thanks, Pearl. I have an action beat which is from Millie's perspective, so I'm going to type that in. And this story is written in the first person, so I'm going to have I smiled shyly at her reflection behind me. And this scene actually takes place in Millie's bedroom, and she's looking in a full body mirror, so that's why I have this line here of I smiled shyly at her reflection behind me. It's that, and we need a comma between thanks and Pearl, because that's the name of a character. But that's all the corrections. Now I'm going to read it again with the corrections inside of this example of dialogue. Pearl wore a wry grin, pulling back the silk ribbon straps of my ruffled baby blue evening gown. You look terrified. I am, I said. It's my birthday, but I already feel like I'm getting hit. What if I say something foolish? Pearl chuckled and smiled. You're good with words. Relax and just be yourself. She tied the straps into a bow behind the small of my back. There, you've all done. This dress brings out your deep blue eyes. I smiled shyly at her reflection behind me. Thanks, Pearl. As you can see, the dialogue sounds a lot better after the corrections than up here. You can distinguish who's saying what, and the dialogue flows much better than before. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and until next time, happy writing!